everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Askari, and today we have two very special guests. We have Mr. Bill Tufts. How's it going?
Hey, it's doing great. I'm out here in Olds, Alberta. I was expecting spring, but we got a cold snap, and it's minus 24, and it feels like minus 33 today. And just 3 weeks ago, I was just out in my t-shirt and jeans doing some work outside.
Basically, a typical Alberta story.
Exactly.
We also have my good friend, Corinne Mori. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and I certainly appreciate hanging out with people who are smarter than me.
Oh, you'll have to find a different crowd.
Yeah, this is all you can get. It's not getting any better from here. So Bill, why don't you, for the benefit of the audience, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and how you got involved in with unions and pensions?
Yeah, I wrote a book. It was called Pension Ponzi, and what it did was looked at pensions in Canada, and particularly the public sector employee pensions. And just my background, I guess, briefly on that was I was working as a financial advisor, working with corporations, giving them advice on their employee benefits and pensions. And out of Hamilton, Ontario, at that point in time for 25 years, and all of a sudden, corporations in the late 1990s started to get into problems with this issue they called legacy problems, and that was the cost of providing retirement benefits for employees that were working in these corporations. Large corporations, at one point in time, most of our large corporations in Canada were all unionized. That situation has changed dramatically in the private sector, and I looked at these pensions. I said, "Well, that's sort of funny. There's a problem with these large corporations, but I know the public sector pensions are gigantic, gold-plated pensions compared to anything that the private sector has. So I wonder if there's a problem with the pension shortfalls in the public sector, and so that any public sector employee from municipal level, provincial, federal level, all enjoy luxurious gold-plated pensions. Just to give you a quick example, I'm a big discussion going on here in Alberta about whether or not Canada should be opting out of the CPP pension and creating their own Alberta pension plan. The pensions that were started in 1966, I think, was the first year of operation for the Canada Pension Plan. It started up, and so Quebec has their own pension plan, but they've become fairly substantial pools of money today. And for example, the Canada Pension Plan has $569 billion in it for 21 million Canadians. So if you do the calculation on that, that's an average of about $27,000 per Canadian that they have in the asset value within the CPP. And compare that to another pension. I always like to use the example that I'm quite familiar with, which was the Ontario Teachers' Pension. Today it has $300 billion. That compares to the 569 in the CPP for 300,000 people compared to the 29 million that are in the CPP. And they have an average asset value of $895,000 per teacher to start their retirement, which is what it provides is a defined benefit pension plan. Typically, these pensions are designed based on the average few years' salary while you're working and give you a 70% pension for life. So a teacher today on pension, when they retire, they're going to be collecting in the range of probably $65,000, $70,000 a year for life. How does that compare to the rest of Canadians? Well, the average CPP payout is $770. So that's comparing to about almost $7,000 a month for a large gold-plated pension. So that teacher's making $65,000 a year in retirement. The half of Canadians over age 65 today are making less than $33,000 a year. when you look at the huge rate of inflation that we've had over the last few years. When Trudeau got elected, the average rental in Canada was $950 a month. Today, it's shot up and escalated to $2,400 a month in Toronto. So if you're a senior making an income of $33,000, half of seniors, and you're paying $2,400 a month, basically seniors that don't own a home would never be able to, afford to live in any one of Canada's top 10 cities. And so that's what pensions have done, or the unions have done for the public sector. And then, of course, that fans out, and there's a few other issues in consideration that we'll have it as we go forth with this discussion here. So that's my background and my, following on unions.
That's impressive as always, Bill. So Corinne, Bill is sort of from the outside looking in, and he is definitely an expert on unions. I would characterize you as you were on the inside, and you figured your way around, and you become an expert that way. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, this will be really fascinating for me because I'm going to tell you a story, Bill, and then I'd like your perspective on the challenges that we've encountered. So I was a registered nurse in BC, and I was terminated due to the COVID vaccine mandates that occurred back in 2021. We are currently the only province that is still enforcing these mandates. And as a result, it led me on a process of exploring what it meant to be a union member, because up until that point, I really hadn't paid any attention at all to the legal requirements that are involved with that relationship between the employee and the employer and the union. So what I discovered is that while we were going through these terminations, we as nurses, even though there had already been an amended flu policy brought forward by the BC government and the union 2 years previous that no nurse would ever be disciplined for not taking a vaccine, when the termination started, we realized that we were not receiving any kind of protection. So what we discovered is of the termination. So that started September of 2021. The president of the BC nurses resigned. We do have a recording with our legal team that she admitted that she was bullied into that. We had the vice president go on sick leave. We had the CEO take a leave. And basically in the months that covered all the terminations, the executive left the building. There was nobody there to enforce this protection. And so in that process, I discovered that when you become a public sector employee, you are forced to become a union member. That payment to the union is taken off your paycheck before you even receive it. And then you legally give responsibility of your representation for any issue in the employment realm to the union. And then it's up to them if they are going to follow through with that representation. In our case, during this process, we discovered a few more things. And one of them was we have over $475 million in a retiree benefits fund that no one will tell us where that money is. Because of our pressure, they gave us a one-time payment of $500 to retired nurses. And I took my retirement when I was terminated just to have a small income while in this process. But we have asked for a breakdown of where that money is, how it's being used, because retirees are not actually benefiting from it. So then we realized that they just weren't disclosing anything to us, which then led me down the path of, so umbrellas operate, or unions operate under the umbrella of a nonprofit, which then they have legal protection in that they don't have to file or declare taxes. And so the amount of disclosure on the financial statements is minimal. And even to their members, there is no responsibility to actually disclose their financial transactions that are going on. So we currently have, according to the financial statements, over 475 million in the retiree benefits fund that no one knows where it is or who's receiving the benefits of it. We also have that nonprofits can only operate as a nonprofit if they don't show a profit. And yet we have one fund it's called a defense fund, which was supposed to be used to financially support nurses if they were ever on strike. And the policy that is in that union is it has to have $25 million in it. Now, the last time nurses striked was, I think, 2006. That fund has never been utilized in almost 20 years, and it is currently at 70 million. And so how does that not constitute a profit? How does that not destabilize the position that this union is still considered a nonprofit? So I'll start with those two questions because I mean there's a lot more that we have uncovered, but let's start with that. What would be your input on that?
Yeah, certainly that's the way it's been with unions for forever, basically. Just to give you a quick idea, just to give you an overview of what unions are all about. Unions were a very powerful force in our modern day societies. They've provided a lot for workers. They brought us things like workers' compensation, workplace safety, more reasonable hours. Certainly over the course of the time that they operated in both the public sector and in the private sector, they brought wage enhancements, probably responsible for a lot of the workplace pensions that used to exist across Canadian society that are basically just exclusive domain of the public sectors today. The huge gap between the public sector in the government employment in Canada. 75% of all government employees are part of the union membership. In the United States, that's 32%. So what's happened with the diminution of private sector pensions as well is that they have diminished in size. What did the private sector membership go from 10% today in the United States to 20% just in 1983? So what happened was that once they brought all these benefits and workplace safety issues into power, they had to then work on a competitive marketplace. The employees did have a choice whether or not they had unions in their private sector membership, and so they had to sort of prove their worth. But there wasn't a whole lot of worth that they were bringing when they were forcing employees to go out on strike, maybe, and cause financial harm in situations like that. And so Canada is uniquely powered by public sector employees. And so what that means is that with that close to 80% membership in the public sector, it's a huge gap between the private sector and the public sector, a huge gap between Canada and the United States. But it's become a huge juggernaut for political activism, basically, because, as you pointed out, there's no disclosure on where the money is going with the unions. They've used that politically very powerfully in a lot of circumstances, like in Calgary, the recent mayor, the team and her slate of councillors and mayors, they spent more than all the other candidates and mayoralty candidates combined, and all of that slate got elected. Provincially, it was a very close to the wire, out by a few thousand votes, that Danielle Smith did not become premier. That was because of the huge influence of the unions here in Alberta. So with 440,000 employees here in Alberta, each of them paying $1,000 a year in union dues, that gave the Alberta public sector pensions a huge war chest of $440 million that they were spending. They don't have to disclose where it's going, who gets it, or what they do with that money. So that my calculation, and having heard from Danielle Smith, the unions probably spent 10 times what Danielle Smith did in her election. They did get elected with the Danielle Smith as premier, but it was very, very close, because that politics is run by money, and in some parts. So when we look at that situation across Canada, the 4.3 million government workers, every government is forced to pay those union dues, whether or not they want to belong to the union or not. It's all tax-free money. That's $4.3 billion. That's a substantial war chest and a war fund that, in my opinion, a substantial portion of it is used for political activism and the issues that are important to the union labor bosses. And so that we can look at some of the issues that they've addressed over the years. Way back in the 1990s, they were bringing forth LBGQT issues. They were bringing critical race theory. Look at it today. The quasi-public sector job I was looking at with Canada Post basically can't be a white, and you certainly can't be a white male to get a job with them, through the diversity employment initiatives that they have. So they've always focused on a lot of those social issues that, in my are quite socialist. So that's the financial background, the power, and the political influence that these unions have. And just that's where we find ourselves in the situation that we are today.
Corinne, do you want to remind us again about just the inordinate amount of money the BC NDP funneled to the BC Nurses Union?
Yeah. So, like I said, we are experiencing a significant amount of money in the union that is being diverted to other priorities, when the fundamental responsibility of it is to protect the socioeconomic well-being of its members. And we currently have thousands of nurses who did not receive adequate representation. We now have all sorts of money being diverted to things that don't represent us. And that is actually an issue in Canadian law. Other countries, at least, they're required to declare what expenses are, expressly around representation and which ones are not. And in other countries, members have the ability to opt out of any kind of expenses that are not related to their representation. That is not the case. This is what is currently going on, is that there are enough laws in place with employment law that workers are protected. What we have is this movement of unions that are becoming a form of mafia cartel. You are forced into paying them for services that they are not obligated to provide. And as a result, and there's no accountability in that process either. I mean, just the fact that if you instilled a choice with workers as to becoming a member or not, would right away implement a level of accountability. If they were not doing their job, nobody would become a member, right? So there's, just the basic introduction of member choice. And then as well, the whole concept of unions should not be allowed to operate under a nonprofit umbrella and be subject to deeper accountability, given the amount of resources that they're using that are people's resource. It's not that they're creating some kind of product and selling it on the marketplace. They are taking our funds and they are not using them appropriately. So then we discovered that, and it was only because of a significant group of nurses that organized together and started a complaint process against our union to the labor board that we even got to arbitration because they were just in process of ignoring us and just delaying the process so that we wouldn't be able to adequately get some justice. What we discovered now is a year ago, the provincial government that's currently being administered by the BC NDP government gave our union $100 million. Now, union membership dues last year were $60 million. And I happened to be at the annual convention that was there in June and had my 2 minutes to say, how is it possible that this union is supposed to hold the government accountable? That's their job. That's the employer. And yet they're taking more money from the employer than they are from their own members. Does that not compromise what your task is? Then we discovered, and so they said, oh, this money is to help supports for mental health for nurses. Nurses never got it. And all they had to do was add it to their Blue Cross benefits. The union did not even have to be involved in the extra supports given for mental health. So those supports never got to nurses, and there was a way that the union did not have to be involved. There's also this current propaganda going on about enforcing nurse-patient ratios. So now we discovered another document, which is another memorandum of understanding between the Ministry of Health, the Health Employers Association of BC, which is kind of the HR department over health authorities, and the union. And they have agreed to give that union, the BC government is giving this union $250 million this year. It said in the memorandum of understanding, 200 million this year, 250 next year, 300 every year thereafter. But I did see a statement by the union that they were just given 250 million from the government. And this was to recruit and retain nurses, of which no money has been given to the terminated nurses. And we are going to arbitration this month. But the union is still blocking our ability to attend and participate in this arbitration. And we have no evidence that they will actually represent us. And we also have this big marketing scheme where Adrian Dix, the Minister of Health, is saying that all this money is going into mandating nurse-patient ratios. So what the public doesn't know is that those ratios were always present. When I worked in hospital here, nurses had a certain amount of patients. And if you had more than that, they had to bring in workload. So this was always part of how the system worked. This is nothing new. But now what I don't understand is that they are not saying how they're actually going to enforce this. So the only way, if you don't have enough healthcare staff providing healthcare in the system, and then you tell the public you're going to mandate that every nurse can only have a certain amount of patients, how can you possibly enforce this? The only way is if they deny healthcare to half the that's the only way that can happen. You can't materialize healthcare professionals out of thin air, especially when you're firing them over mandates that are illegal. So that's okay. So now I'll let you talk.
Bill, let me tee this up for you. This money that's going to the union, so we're paying taxes, it goes to the government, and then it's a money laundering thing, right? Like it goes to the unions, and the unions support the campaign for whatever NDP is running. Is this what's happening?
Well, basically, I think there's an election this year in BC. That's just, corruption and criminal bribery, and in times gone by, in an era, 40 or 50 years ago, that would be, they're just bribing the unions to make sure they get all of their members out to vote for the NDP. How many times have you seen wage agreements, in Ontario for years. Just before an election, you'd have a whole parade of public sector unions going out on strike. If you don't give us these huge wage increases, we're not going to bring our teams behind you. Some of this, some things that we've seen during elections is that in the labor union agreements, there's employees can go out and spend a whole week with full pay campaigning, but it has to be approved by the steward. If you thought you're going to say, hey, I'm going to go out and be campaigning in this election for the Conservatives, no, we need you here. You can't leave your work spot. But hey, I'm going to be going out to do it for the NDP or Liberals, and under those circumstances. So it's what you're describing as a quid pro quo system, and so you scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours. We've seen that go on for decades, and so that from my perspective, I don't know how we put an end to it. It's obviously destroying our society. Healthcare is the Second Street report brought out by Colin Craig, who's a friend of mine, that showed, and he's very conservative, he used to be a director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, that last year there were 17,000 Canadians died before they even got diagnosed on their health care because there just wasn't the room and the space for them. So bring in, a requirement for more, less patients per health professional. That's just a way of bolstering those numbers for the unions. When Trudeau got in, there was about 3.6 million public sector employees across Canada. Today, with 4.3, that's huge numbers. If you have 4.3 public sector members, I would suggest that a significant portion of those come out and they vote based on the direction of the union, who during the course of directors and elections send out emails. Hey, we've looked at it and analyzed it. Here's how you should be voting. 3.3 public sector employees that are good, supporting to make sure that their wages aren't cut back or anything happens to their pensions to vote for Trudeau. He only got elected with 5.5 votes, 5.5 million votes in the last election. So it's all part of the, political and economic system that exists in Canada today, and we're seeing just how devastating it is, particularly since Trudeau came in. And the first, it took Harper how many years in power to bring in Bill 371, which was going to disclose how they were, was going to make the unions disclose how they were spending all that union dues money. And there was a sort of a companion bill to that was going to be a requirement for the First Nations as well. It passed in December 2015, but we know that Trudeau was elected in October 2015, so the bill was already in place, on its way to getting royal assent in December 30th, 2015. Guess what the first bill was that Trudeau rescinded? Union disclosure.
Could I clarify one thing?
Yes.
Was under the impression that the provincial government had authority over implementation of laws for unions. Would you be able to give me a picture of what power exactly could be initiated at a provincial level if we have a change in government with, say, the Conservative BC party? If one of the initiatives that could restabilize power back to workers instead of having it removed by a union, would it be possible to implement things through legislation provincially?
Yes. I don't know that, for most public sector employees, it's a pretty sweet spot to be. You're in the private sector and you're going to collect $700 a month in CPP, or you're going to continue on with the public sector union that has gotten you a pension worth $70,000 a year for the rest of your life through retirement. I think there's a large component of cognitive dissonance there. Man, these huge wages relative to the private sector, private sector's paid about 32% less than or more than the public sector is paid about 32% more than the private sector on an equivalent job in the private sector. And then these huge gold-plated pensions. One of the examples out of these gold-plated pensions was 30 years of service. And in Toronto, the average police compensation, fire compensation is about $160,000 a year. That includes, in some instances, benefits and pension costs that the employees are paying. But when you retire on 70% of that, you're entitled to $100,000 a year pension, and you're going to have to struggle through retirement on a $9,000 a month check. I don't know how they're going to do it, but
well, so I'll add in another perspective here. So what I'm seeing is that the level of education of most workers does not really include a real broad understanding of finances and the implications of things. We're running at this basic level where people assume that if they're getting increased wages every year, that they're in a better position financially. But currently in our government here, we have this massive increase in carbon tax that is, at this point, my last bill, the carbon tax was more than the actual fuel on my home heating, and it's set to go up again April 1st. We have, I believe, Kevin Falcon from the United Party stated that just since the NDP party has gotten in, there's been 37 new taxes implemented. And I know for myself, even my local property tax in the last 10 years has gone up 400% from less than $4,000 to over $11,000. So just because they are increasing wages, what is actually happening, and maybe what the public is not understanding, is that they're actually coming home with it has started this process where the cost of living in this province is no longer doable. And as a result, there has been a mass exodus of professionals over to Alberta because it is the cost of property here is unreasonable. And in fact, I was speaking to somebody that works at one of our local financial institutions, and I was told that just on her desk this month, she rejected 40 mortgage applications and approved 0 because the current income that is needed to afford an average property in this community is $160,000, which is just not doable in this community. So the story is very lopsided. You're $2 more an hour, or the ability that you might have a pension in 20 years, you are being robbed of every chance of building a sound financial basis in your own life because the government is currently just taking all of our resources. So it's how do you bring this forward to the public so that they understand that their continued participation in this illusion is actually putting them in a position where their chance of having any kind of asset base is quickly disappearing.
On to you, Bill.
Oh, I get the tough ones, do I? Well, we're swinging this into more of a political discussion, and watch some of the articles that I write, or Epic Times, or some of the other podcasts on talking about a huge, wide variety of issues that are all converging to, impact what's happening in Canada. Read that scathing Andrew Coyne article that shows just how quickly Canada is disintegrating. We're down at the bottom of the OECD countries of 28. We're at the bottom of the G7. The huge gap that's occurred between us and the United States. But just to finish up the pension issue, I think two things that you should be looking at that I think could get traction with the public if we ever decided to, control the unions. One of them is the concept of card check. Not quite this concept, but it's why should you be forced to pay union dues if you don't agree with what they're doing and all the things that they're bringing forth and they're trying to advocate for. The second aspect is why is our Canadian governments collecting the union dues for the unions? Like everything that the public sector unions do in Canada is completely against the benefit of the Canadian taxpayer. Because if you look through whatever organizations, the highest compensation of any government organization is compensation that goes from 50% municipalities up to 65% in healthcare. So that thing is all funded and run on the compensation that goes into the public sector. One example here in the town that I live in Alberta, Olds, Alberta, 9,900 people. We've got a CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, here in the town that makes a wage of $270,000 a year. Like, that stuff just doesn't make any sense. There's the complete destruction of the middle class that we've had in Canada, but I would suggest right across North America and the United States as well. It is going to bode horribly for the future. I saw a report out of the Federal Reserve in the United States that the top 1% of the elites in the United States control as much wealth as the bottom 20, 40, 60, 80%, 60%, 80%, I forget what the number was, of the bottom sector. So that one of the things that always made Canada so strong and preserved our democracy and made us, function as well as we did was the health of a middle class. That the middle class was always the ones that, created the new jobs, created the economic opportunity, paid the taxes that flooded out into the other parts of the society. There's always been a debate, does the compensation that go to the public sector employee really create any wealth for the country, or is it just a consumption of the existing wealth that's there? That's really crushed down and squeezed the middle class. If you look, I looked at the last labor stat came out in January from Stats Canada, and how many people are in Canada today?
40 million.
40 million, right on. I'm surprised at how many people aren't aware of that. It's gone up about 5 million people since Trudeau got in. Based on that 40 million, we have 16.6 full-time workers. So basically those 16.6 full-time workers are the ones paying the taxes. The elites don't pay it. The taxes, it's all sheltered offshore. The bottom couple of demographic layers of our society don't pay taxes. And so there's just a very small portion of Canadians that are full-time workers that are paying taxes in Canada. But out of that 16.6 million Canadian full-time workers, 4.3 million are public sector. And so that leaves 12.2 million full-time private sector workers that are carrying the burden for 40 million people. Like, that's barely 25%. So you can see just, what an alarming situation that we're in. Anybody that's in that situation that has the ability to, I think there's a big mass exodus leaving the country and saying, what the heck's going on? And I think that's why the, income indicators have, completely collapsed in Canada based on that Andrew Coyne article that I urge you to read out of the National Post that came out. So it just creates a huge myriad of dilemmas that I don't know how we pull ourselves out of it. It's all run for the benefit of the elite based on that wealth, accumulation with the large elites, but the public sector is part of that elite class as well. The accumulation of public sector employee pensions has created a $1.2 trillion pool that has created a pretty big cushion for retiring employees, but obviously not all of it goes there. There's lots of it being siphoned out today in corruption and criminality, and we have no, how much are they paying the union bosses out of that $4.3 billion? With that $1.2 trillion of pension assets accumulated for the public sector, they've become the largest holder of government bonds. They've become the largest owners of real estate in Canada, commercial and residential. Think about a pension that owns 10. Some of them, some of their accumulations down in the States bring them up to hundreds of thousands of residential units. So since Trudeau got in with their $950 a month rent to $2,400 a day, that's hugely beneficial for them. Look at the amount of revenue that has been increased and generated. But what does it mean for our children? I know one of my daughter, she's not going to have a chance of ever owning a home. There's a whole class of generations that are in that position. So it's sort of, I know we're on to the unions and what's happening there, but it just rolls out right across Canada. The impact of what we're doing creates divisiveness, right across multiple layers of our society. And quite frankly, we're in huge trouble here in Canada. One of the things that I'm expectantly waiting for is the end of March Stats Can release on the population numbers. That's overwhelming all of our social, our democracy and all of those institutions that were sort of indicative of the success and the wealth that we had for our society. We've seen when it's that one last year, it was 1.2 million people that came into the country. That would make our fourth largest city in between Calgary and Edmonton. Like, how could you build that much infrastructure that fast in 1 year? Build a city of Edmonton in 1 year to accommodate the housing, but it also rolls out into healthcare. I think that's an indication of that 17,000 people in Canada that died just waiting for healthcare. Our schools are in the same situation, and just all parts of our society. So the exponential growth trend that we're on, that 1.2 million people, that would have been, if I went back and looked, that was a decade of mass immigration over in sometime in the last century. Some of the decades that we have never achieved that. Just the last quarter of last year, we had 431,000 newcomers coming into the country. There's no jobs for them. There's no, they're relying on social subsidies, that tax bill, and that 431,000 would have been one of the top 5 years of immigration that we had ever had since 1867, and that was just in 3 months.
So can I just interject here?
Please do. I'm off track a little bit.
Oh no, that's okay. I have one question that, just write it down, because there's two other points that I want to bring in that I just encountered recently.
Yes.
The question I have for you would be, have you identified a vulnerable spot where we can actually leverage some influence and change the power structures that unions have right now that are basically unaccountable to members? They're unaccountable to the public. So I'm looking for that spot where we potentially could change the power dynamics of what is going on. Besides, right now we are using the labor board for the complaint process, but I'd like to know if you have any other thoughts. There's two things that I just want to interject in terms of just information that I think the public would find interesting. So I actually went, I'm going to talk about the whole just the nurses in BC. We know, because of what our Ministry of Health and Adrian Dix has been telling us, and the fact that rural BC is what is being hit. The distribution of resources to rural BC is significantly less than what is given to urban areas. So we have issues where healthcare emerges are shutting down. There just isn't staff to keep these open. Now, I went into the BC College of Nurses and Midwives website and looked up all their annual reports. And what I found interesting is we have never had such a high number of nurses. So in 3 years, we've gone from 60,000 to almost 70,000. So what I've done is I've currently put in freedom of information requests to all of the health authorities, because what I'm trying to investigate is how many nurses are now in managerial and administrative positions, because I think that's what's happened. The health authorities have created cushy jobs where nurses don't have to do shift work. They don't have to give patient care. They just create bureaucracy. And we are actually removing frontline nurses from patient care into desk jobs. And I know this firsthand just from my hospital here, which is why I started investigating this. So my assumption is that we actually have nurses. What we have is health authorities intentionally rediverting this profession from healthcare to administration. So I'm just putting that out there. I'll let you know when I get all my numbers back, and then we'll have something to work with. The other component is this whole. Now, in our local community, we've been really following the provincial overreach into local government. And so there is this Land Development Act that has just been passed through our legislature last November. And what they are trying to do is impose on a provincial level the development that has to happen in local communities. So what I saw in our local paper on Friday was a amendment bylaw, that a zoning amendment bylaw that the city of Nelson is implementing. This came out on Friday, and the council meeting is tomorrow, March 5th. I looked online for this amendment. I couldn't find it on the City of Nelson website. I also couldn't find it online on the newspaper site. It was only that it happened to be printed in the paper. And in that statement, it said that this serves as the notice that there will be no public hearing around this. And so the amendment is that they are going to change all of the lots in the city to be zoned so that they will have a minimum of the capacity for a minimum of 3 or 4 units, and with also the ability to do whatever the developer wants. So what this means is they have, and this will be part of the provincial authority that will be dictated over municipal levels. And what it does is it removes any public hearing process, and it removes the ability of the local residents to participate in the decision making. So what happens when you have significant development happen where one single family home is taken out and 4 units are put in? There is this increased infrastructure requirements that this city, just as an example, currently is not meeting. They have water restrictions, and they also have a sewage treatment plant that is on the river that periodically dumps into the river. So we know that they don't have the infrastructure. We know that the provincial government has not promised any funding to increase that infrastructure, which means then that all the taxpayers will be responsible for the costs incurred with that. You also have now this reduced capacity for flow of just people. What if, so there's this push now that you have to have an electric, they want electric vehicles pushed through, which requires you have to have a plug-in for it. So if you just have housing that is filling the lot, there's nowhere to park a vehicle that you can plug it in because you can't run extension cords to the street, and you have no parking for any kind of vehicles. Just you start to imagine what a community looks like when you're packing all these people in, and there is no proper policy created beforehand. to make sure that it doesn't create chaos in your community. So I just wanted to throw that in, that this is something currently that's going on in our province where people are losing their say, their rights to speak, to participate in decisions that impact their own community. It is all going to be decided from people who are in large urban centers that don't understand the needs that we have. And we are basically giving the keys of our city to a provincial layer that it does not have the same investment in it that we do. So I just wanted to throw that in as just an FYI, but let's go back to what my question was, if you remember what.
I don't remember. Just
I was listening.
The two things that I identified earlier sort of give you leverage to, crack the walnut on unions. One of them would be the voluntary membership by public sector employees. Yeah, I don't want to be involved with this. And you know what? I really don't want my money going towards these initiatives as well. The second thing would be, why the hell is taxpayers collecting the union dues on behalf of the unions? They should be collecting their own union dues, and particularly when it's something that's completely against the best interests of the community. And you can see how all these issues start to blend together. Look at, I don't know if you followed the UN DRIP program that was just implemented and rescinded because of large populist or popular, dissent on that. We have to hold these governments to accountable. One of the encouraging things that I see across Canada is that a lot of these freedom groups that had stuff are starting to put their focus on these other issues. Other cities in BC, they mandated that the transfer of a property will require 6 units being built on a regular family home residential property. I know from my brother in Radium, BC, who was trying to get his acreage lands, 8 acreage property subdivided and turned into some other use. Now at the transfer of an acreage in Alberta, you need to have zone the plan for properties on that single property. So it just so many issues that are confronting Canadians now. I used to joke, hey, I'm, as an armchair historian, I'm sort of interested to see and watch for the collapse of a civilization that only happens once, a couple of times every century or millennia. But in 2014, I've become scared as I sit in the front row and watch that collapse with all of these other issues that just go right through the system. Everything has an impact. You were talking earlier about incomes here, not on. Yeah, let me see that labor force statistic that I was talking about earlier. There was with the full-time employees and how many of them were public sector. Also out of that report, and they recorded that 1 million people came into Canada that were eligible to be in the workforce. 1 million people. But we only created 226,000 full-time jobs. Only 25% of those people that came in were able to work. Just the spin out from that is crazy, and just has cracked all of our democratic institutions. And
there's a few things that I've been watching. So just this week, watched one of our MLAs. I think he's with the United Party, Lauren Dirksen, from the Cariboo region, was in legislature talking about the massive debt that the NDP government has just passed in terms of going into debt more to be able to pay for their budget. We are at levels now that I don't think we could actually ever pay this back. And so we're also at a place where there's a ton of projects that have been going on up in northern BC, Site C and other massive employers, that all those projects are winding down and there's nothing in the works to actually now provide jobs for that sector. We have this, just on a local level, we've been trying to bring accountability to our regional district because, again, they're forecasting double-digit property tax increases again, which if that passes in 3 years, our taxation will have gone up 40%.
Wow.
We have significant issues that are being created in this province. And it's almost like it's being set up so that whoever gets into power in the next election will be destined to fail because there is no solution to what has just been implemented in terms of how we're going to be able to survive this. So we have, for all of us, I call this the war of the whiteheads. Payman is still catching up because he's not quite at the level that we are. But because of our experience, we have a little bit more of an ability to anticipate problems that are going to be coming up. And, in fact, I'm registered for an event this afternoon, which is our regional district is doing some education on the updated building code. And there is this big move that all natural gas connections, like heating, hot water, is no longer going to be allowed, and you have to use clean energy, electricity. Except we already have reports from BC Hydro this year that we only produced 80% of what we needed. We had to purchase from Alberta, purchase from the US, and both of those places are using fossil fuels to create the energy. So we're creating now housing that is going to put even more demand on our electrical needs that we currently do not have the ability to provide. And so when you start looking at that, so what would that look like in 4 years? Well, it looks like we're not going to have enough electricity. What happens when you're short on a resource? The price goes up. What happens when you can't meet the demand? Well, some people go without. It's just trying to create questions around decisions that are being made. And is there common sense? That question of common sense. Does this actually look like this decision is going to make our lives better? And I'm not seeing that. And I'm very appreciative to the population that has stood up and is finding the crowd that is working hard on this, and the level of intelligence that has been organized in terms of looking at the law, doing the research, putting the dots together, collaborating on distributing this information to the public. When you look at what that has evolved into in just 2 years, it is pretty incredible. We don't hire based on a minority checkbox. We hire based on what is your capacity and what is your ethical integrity. And because of that, we have created the ability to self-govern in a way that we are actually protecting the public without any money. Like, nobody's getting paid, and yet everyone has stepped up to the plate here because of their understanding that if we don't participate right now, we are not going to survive this. And I don't think I'm being hysterical here. I can see where we're headed in just even 5 years. It doesn't even have to be a question about what's left for our children. It really is, in our lifetime, what is going to be left for us. So I'll end.
I just wanted to put something out there. Corinne, Bill, you could both jump in. I'm assuming a province's funding revenue that principally comes from provincial tax, and escaping a province is far easier than escaping a country. I mean, I could just move to Alberta. So what happens when BC goes so heavily into debt that people just landowners sell the property, or the property values are going to plummet and they're just going to move to Alberta? How does that look? Do they have to start selling crown land to, I don't know, the Rothschilds, the banks, the bankers? What's the end game? I don't know, Bill, if you want to.
Yeah, don't worry. They own a significant portion of it. Bill Gates, the public sector pensions are huge owners of all of that stuff. The elites, just to give you an example, so with the amount of people coming into the country, they said we need like 5 million new housing units. We're building 250,000 a year, so we need 5 million by 2030. So like just ridiculously stupid ideas that nobody's really thought about it. But the first 2 million units that they want built are residential rental units. So think about that: 2 million residential rental units at a $2,500 a month average rent in the major cities. That's $60 billion that and 2 million people won't own anything. You will own nothing. But will you be happy? And who's collecting that $60 billion of income off of these rental units? So it's just I used to be able to predict what's going to happen, what's coming down the pipe, and I've been happy. Was always proud of the back in 2021, I was talking about this who dilemma that we face today. Wrote an article that what they want to do is create these emergency acts and other stuff, but they were going to turn climate change into a pandemic because it was causing so many health impacts on people's lives. And once they changed it into a pandemic, they could go back and introduce this, the WHO pandemic plan that they've got in place. So it's just mind-boggling. We have scumbags in Canada. Unfortunately, they're the ones with the most significant power that are just bringing in plans that are designed to completely destroy our society, and they've been doing very well, as we see in more and more of these reports, like that Andrew Coyne or the BC Council of Business that pointed, the first ones to point out that Canada was flailing behind as the last country in the OECD countries. Our per person capita has declined since 2014 or something, because
we've also got the issue where the population dynamics are changing. So you have a younger population who does not remember what life used to be like, and we have a dilution of our population with immigrants who also are not familiar with how our country used to run, which was that you could get healthcare, you could actually own a house. And so now it's become normalized that you will never get access to these things. And this is normal, even though with our Canadian healthcare system, we are actually one of the top in the world in terms of cost per person that taxpayers are paying for our healthcare system. Yet the actual provision of that healthcare is at average or below average. So, and then also this concept that, it's normal that you can't get a doctor and that you have to wait 12 hours in an emergency department. This is institutionalization. It is sending kids to school and telling them that the learning process is you have to regurgitate what we tell you. There is no process available in post-secondary education, because I did mine. I finished in 2015. I did it later in life. And so I have, recent exposure to the post-secondary education. And again, that was ideology. That was, if you wanted to pass the course, you had to play the game. You had to, all your assignments had to give back what they told you, and you could not challenge or critically think. All that does is prepare people to go into government sectors where, again, you are told how to think, you're told how to do your job, you're told how you can talk, you're told, how even if you come up with efficiencies that would help, It is
Mm.
reinforced over and over that your input is not valuable. They will continue doing what they're doing. And so it just decreases the morale of the workplace. And we're finding that because people are just, there isn't the same commitment to making the workplace better because you're continually imposed from the top down with inefficiencies that are not helping anything. So we have this whole belief system now that is being integrated into this current generation, that they don't have the right to expect what is due them. And there is at least a percentage of the population that is saying, hold on, we've been taken advantage of, we've been abused, our money is not being accounted for, we demand better. And because we've never really had to engage in this process before, this has been a whole new thing that we have had to learn. And it's at times it feels very overwhelming because the more that you follow these roads and you understand how deep this has infiltrated our society, it can be quite discouraging. But then again, like I said before, when you start looking back over just the last 2 years and the organized effort that has, well, we've seen it happen in Alberta, and that has been a good example for us to understand what happens when people actually connect and work together. And it's starting to rise in BC. The government may think that we are a group of people that can be easily manipulated, but I would say that they're finding out they misjudged.
That's for sure. That's a very good analysis. And I think if you look at somebody like Desmond Mateus, who wrote about, what was it, mass formation, he had indicated a special threshold where finally the society hits its tipping point and it becomes aware and there is societal change. And so we're basically against sort of another societal change that's happening as well. If you're paying attention to any of the European countries that have all melted down over mass immigration, there's a certain threshold of immigration that it becomes too large, that the whole thing just melts down as well. There's no way that we can put this many people together from so many cultures and expect that it's going to sustain itself. But more relevant to your comment there was that was Canadian politics. For 150 years, we were one of the wealthiest countries in the world. There was no problem. We had business working together. We had government working together. We didn't have a whole lot of problems. But now that we've gone into these turbulent globalist times, the problem is that we don't have any politicians who are prepared to stand out and make the bold and courageous actions. Because for the longest time, your job as a politician was, you know what, hey, you're a nice, young, brilliant man, come in, or woman, and we just want you to manage things. Maintain the status quo. Don't come up with any new ideas. Don't rock the boat. Just maintain the things the way they are. But now that we've gone into extremely turbulent times, Canada is in cataclysmic social, economic, political collapse. We don't have anybody that has had the training to stand out there and make those decisions. So that sort of puts us into a predicament to where we go in the future. So it's
well, we also have this fundamental problem where our elected representation, we have not required any kind of competency to be attached to that participation. We don't require a reading competency. We don't require any kind of financial management or financial statement understanding. And it's certainly interesting that we would just vote people in who have access to our bank accounts and not make sure that there's some kind of skill behind their participation in this role. And And I'll admit, I'm part of the guilty in that I wasn't paying attention and
Not many.
wasn't participating myself. But now we're at a place where that's not good enough. And so with the next election rollout, whether it's municipal, provincial, school board trustee, we need to call out to those people who actually do have the skill and the intelligence and the experience to be able to try to restabilize what has happened to us. And I get that a lot of people who have these skills are older and they want to just kind of retire and enjoy life. But there comes a point where we do have to step out of that comfort level and bring forward our abilities to try to restabilize what is going on. And so, I'm putting out a request for those who have been thinking about this, that it's time to acknowledge that we need you and we need you to step up. And we need you, if you're going to step up, that you show up prepared. So if you need education on how financial statements work, you need to get it. If you have issues in your own life where you haven't taken care of your own affairs, you need to take care of that first before you think that you can start managing other people's affairs. There has to be also this layer of integrity that is uncorruptible, because that kind of position will put you at an increased risk that you can be intimidated, pushed off course, eased into thinking that, this one little thing won't matter, and the compromise. We have to identify those that are will not break under the pressure. And when we find those people, we need to support them. So there has to be help given. Criticism doesn't work unless you're actually showing up to give a solution. This is now group participation time. And it's not just that one person is going to come and rescue us. That is, at this point, that is a ridiculous notion. It is how teams of people are going to have to start to work together to, one, identify where the problems are, come up with solutions that are outside the box, and have the resolve and courage to make sure that we can implement whatever it takes to make sure that our democratic process is protected, that our resources are distributed fairly, and that the people are not robbed of the energy that they put into life.
I know this might come as a shock, but I'm very impressed with the direction that this country has gone, and the fact that so many Canadians have stepped up. So Corinne, like, we have a mutual friend, Lisa and Erica, I believe they're running BC Rising. Bill, if you don't know who that is, they hosted Bruce Party recently, I think last
I
week.
saw that. Yeah, those are the types of organizations. BC Rising, Take Back Alberta. Right across the country, they're rising.
So I guess we're approaching the end of the show, but I wanted to leave on a note of optimism. So that was my note, and I know you two have given good feedback. But is there anything you want to add, like any specific thing that people can do to get this country back on track? Corinne, maybe you go first.
I find the most power is at your local level, and so for our community, we have been attending our local regional district meetings. We've been meeting with our directors. We communicate with them all the time about things that we expect. And we just show up, because then there's something that shifts when you are passing votes on behalf of other people. If no one is there, it's a lot easier to just put your hand up and agree with whatever you're told, versus you have a room full of people that are watching who's doing what and are they actually representing you. So just showing up, getting involved in, if there is a local team that is actually actively organizing, just hook up with them. You don't have to be totally committed to everything, but you can at least create email lists, distribute information, let let the public know issues that are going on. Like I'm currently right now trying to let people in the city of Nelson know that, by the way, there's a zoning amendment bylaw happening this week, and maybe you don't know about it. Just little things like that are what creates a shift in how information is distributed, and then that shifts how people respond to it. We don't know how the ultimate outcome of all of this is going to be, but I do know that the fact that people just do their little part, it has a ripple effect. And so don't discredit that or negate it or diminish it. It is significant. So just show up, show your face.
Exactly.
What about yourself, Bill?
Yeah, that's the only way we're going to save the country is just participating at the local level, bringing our communities together, waking people up as to what's going on, and just staying in touch with them. Going to be a lot of very turbulent times ahead. And did you ever do a presentation out in the BC Island, Corinne, on somebody by the name of Corinne out in the island that brought my awareness to the Soyuz BC that was facing a 40% tax increase, tied of what's happening with the UN DRIP program and participation with Bruce Party, but yeah, just get involved, please. It's so important, so urgent that we've got to, preserve what we have as a country. As it every day, more and more of it gets flushed down the toilet, I think. But it was great to visit with you, Corinne, and I would encourage you to stay, in touch with the, what's happening in the public sector unions. And hey, thanks for having me on again, Payman. It's great to see you, and you're doing a great job on your podcast. I hope everybody gets a chance to check out your channel and see some of the interesting discussions that you've brought. And just I think you set it up just a short time ago, but holy smokes, you've done created a lot so far, especially with me and Corinne here.
Yeah, well, as long as there's an infinite supply of expert, interesting people like yourself, I'm set.
Have a great day, guys.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Corinne. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.